you.
Okay. Right, where do I start? I've only got 5 minutes, so I've got to keep it brief. Firstly, do we ever stop to think about where our kit has come from? What materials we used to make it? Who made it? How it was dyed? How it was transported to shops? All these things play a key role in the overall impact of the finished product. Different countries have different rules. Some are more lax than others. Water pollution, working conditions, waste, recycling, and of course, transportation are all key things we need to evaluate in order to fully understand the. When you look at this list, it doesn't appear to include much, but when you look closely behind each item, you realise there is a lot more to consider. I could spend hours talking about the pros and cons of each, but time is ticking by, so I will just provide the highlights. The dreaded PFCs, dubbed the forever chemical. In a nutshell, these are the chemicals applied to the fabric to make them waterproof. The problem is these chemicals have been linked to many health and environmental problems. Can you believe traces have even been found in the blood of polar bears? There are alternatives, and many of the brands are currently using them. I, for one, can vouch that they are just as effective. If you look in the label of your ski kit, you'll notice that it's primarily made of polyester and nylon. These synthetics were introduced in the 1940s and have been popular ever since. The problem is, these synthetics rely heavily on fossil fuels for their production. 70 billion barrels of oil are reportedly used each year to produce it. The good news is that some brands are using recycled polyester in the form of plastic bottles. By buying recycled polyester, you can be confident that you're not only minimizing the use of fossil fuels, but also ensuring less plastic waste. Unfortunately, when we wash our polyester, it releases tiny microfibers that seep into our waterways. Cotton is used a lot in our kit. Although it's a natural fibre, it's sadly quite detrimental to the environment if it isn't grown properly. It requires vast amounts of water, fertiliser and pesticides. Recycled and organic cottons are now widely used and are clearly a much better choice, but it still needs the water. Down is also a fantastic insulator and it's often used in our outerwear. Sadly, however, it can be quite controversial. It's important to understand exactly where your down has come from. Some brands have a track your down label in the clothes so you can trace it all the way back to the farm. As with down, it's important to understand where your wool has come from. Merino wool is now used in a lot of garments. It's incredibly comfortable, absorbent and regulates your heat. Both types of wool are natural fibres and biodegradable, so are great, providing they've been responsibly sourced. Again, some brands allow you to track your wool all the way back to the farm. Another controversial material. It's used predominantly in our gloves. Always check where the leather has come from and that it is a byproduct of the meat industry. Fashion changes are often common, and with that comes demand for more colours. Dyeing our fabric requires gallons of water. If dyeing is carried out in factories that aren't adhering to strict environmental laws, a lot of wastewater and chemicals could end up in our waterways. A lot of our brands are now using solution dyeing methods, which reportedly save up to 80% of water and 85% emissions. Another very important factor in the whole process is labour. Sadly, modern-day slavery does still exist. It is so important to ensure our kit is made in factories adhering to the Fair Wear Foundation. We all know that the vast majority of our kit is made overseas. How we transport it is another key consideration. Is it shipped, flown, or transported by rail? A lot of brands are committed to reducing their air freight. Some are exploring rail. What we do is reduce, reuse, and recycle. Our eco-skied arm of the business will be working alongside companies like Whoski to ensure we close the loop. I'm now very conscious of time, so I won't go into too much detail on the plant-based products. I'm still also doing my homework, but it's exciting to hear that some brands believe this is the future. Thank you so much for listening. It was really hard to summarize in 5 minutes all the incredible things these brands are doing, but hopefully it's given you a little bit of understanding. Thank you. Over to you, Sally.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Very interesting about where our ski gear comes from. So we're going to hand over to Daniel Elkan in a minute, who was the founder of SnowCarbon and is a sustainable travel journalist. So he knows his stuff. SnowCarbon can help skiers choose the best resorts, places to stay, obviously the best travel to get to ski resorts by rail, and is an independent guide to ski holidays by train. Less carbon, more fun, as he quite rightly says about his brand. So Daniel, how easily can you reach ski resorts by train and overcome some of the travel obstacles? I know when I've tried to get trains, I get completely confused by the timetables and go from A to B to C and end up thinking this is actually more difficult and not worth my time doing it. So how do we overcome that?
Okay, thanks Sally. Hi everyone. There is, sorry, I'm putting the timer on. I can't see it now. Doesn't matter. There are loads of great ski resorts you can get to by train. It is a fantastic way to travel. You can get to resorts in France, Austria, Switzerland, and Italy. Oops. And this is the dog I met on a journey to Morzine recently. Why is the dog looking so sad if the train journeys are so good? Well, the dog is thinking about all those skiers that still end up flying, thinking it's going to be a quick hop to the slopes. It isn't. It always takes all day, and you spend all day in queues. And the alternatives, you know, traveling by train, you have space, you have the social aspect, you have just a really, really comfortable, relaxing way to travel. And the scenery is fantastic. If you go overnight, you can end up with 2 extra days on the slopes at either end of your holiday. So it makes sense from so many different aspects, and it's, you know, it's a great way to arrive much closer to the Alps, and it becomes part of the holiday. It also is much more sustainable. 10 years ago, Mountain Riders and the DEM did a study where they took the entire carbon footprint of a ski resort, and they found that 57%, that's the area in orange, is just the transport of holidaymakers to the resort. And if you're going by train rather than plane, you can save about 80% of the carbon emissions on average, and compared to a car, about, depending on how full the car is, between 50% and 80% as well. So it's much more sustainable. But the problem is it's not always easy to find out how to do it. That's one of the reasons I set up SnowCarbon. After years writing about train travel to ski resorts, I realized there needed to be some place that people can find out in much more detail how to do it, where to go, what it's like. It should be much easier. All these train companies should be working together. They formed Rail Team 10 years ago, but really they're doing a fraction of what they could be in terms of making it easier for people to book. And that's why sites like Seat 61 are brilliant places to go for advice generally about how to travel to Europe by train. It's really detailed. It's got some great stuff in there. Also, the rail map of Europe, I cannot recommend this. I don't know if you can see that. I cannot recommend this highly enough. It's absolutely brilliant for planning, for getting a perspective in terms of which ways your journey could take you, where you can go. You know, apps and maps combined are absolutely brilliant. At SnowCarbon, one of the things we try to do is help people to to be able to look up the schedules further in advance. If you're planning a ski holiday, you want to kind of work out which resorts are going to be right, which journey would be right, and you need to know the schedules. The problem is that train companies don't publish schedules until tickets are on sale. But if you're planning a ski holiday, you want to look further in advance before you even think about booking the tickets. So at SnowCarbon, we list ski resorts, and for each ski resort, we have a journey planner which has what we consider to be the best journeys. We hand research them, we put them into this unique database, and people can view this journey planner up to a year, for journeys up to a year in advance, which makes planning much easier. A lot of journeys do require a change in Paris. Don't ever let that put you off. It's easy. You can turn up at the end of the Eurostar platform, have a pre-booked taxi. It will take you across Paris, and from there you can get onto a TGV, onto a sleeper train to some parts of France. There are also journeys via Brussels, also journeys via Lille, where you don't even have to change. So there are loads of different options. Be aware that when you're booking online, there are lots of times when you might see that it looks like trains are not available, but actually, if you know what to do, they are available. And so it's very important not to trust exactly what you see online. There are lots of rail booking agents who can help you. You can phone up, talk to a human being. They can help you work out what the best journey and how, and book the tickets for you in one go. And we at SnowCarbon, we know them all, work with them all, and we can help introduce you. And we're here to help you with, advice on which resort, where to stay, and how to get there. But it is a fantastic way to make the journey part of the holiday. Thanks. Over to Sally.
And that's really interesting. And I love the fact you take your cat on holiday as well. I think my cat would quite enjoy going skiing. We did have one question while you were speaking, which myself and Peter can't answer. So if I could just ask you that one quickly. We had Ian, who lives in Manchester, and he says it's much more of a struggle to go from the north. It's fine if you're in the south or in London. Have you got any suggestions for him? And he's also been recently skiing in the Dolomites as well.
Dolomites is a brilliant place. Ian, yeah, that's a great question. When I first started writing about this and set SnowCarbon up, I thought, yeah, it really is only going to work for kind of people that live near London. I am amazed when you go down to St Pancras, and I live in London, so when you go back down to St Pancras on a Saturday and you hear people gathering and you talk to them, there are people who have come from Manchester, Liverpool. We get emails that we help people at SnowCarbon who are coming from Devon, Cornwall, Wales, Scotland. Go to SnowCarbon and have a look at the Your Stories section on the site where skiers give their own accounts. There's a wonderful one I put up yesterday by a skier from Simon who took his family from Scotland to Montgenèvre in France. So it does take longer if you're traveling from Manchester shore, but if you stop at a hotel in London and then start from there, or go all the way through to Paris, or do it all in one day, you can still have a great journey. It doesn't take that much longer, and just enjoy the time, enjoy the scenery, enjoy the sociality of that way of traveling.
Thank you. So next I'm going to introduce Ian Martin from Skipedia and Ski Flight Free in the Ski Podcast. With similar aspirations to Daniel, he has started a campaign to Ski Flight Free as well, to encourage skiers to travel to the Alps without flying. His website gives tons of green resort information as well, and is a really good tool if you want to look at what different resorts are doing to be greener. So Ian, why did this journey start? And how do you think human behaviour influences that change? Are we seeing more from the younger generation? And how are resorts starting to see the light? Over to you.
Okay, well, let me see if I can put my screen on. Great. Okay, yeah, so that was a lovely introduction, Sally. Thank you very much. I work in the ski industry in digital marketing and present the ski podcast, but the reason I'm here today is as the founder of Ski Flight Free. And there's a lot of crossover with what Daniel was talking about there, because if we think about what Ski Flight Free is, just bear with me. It's very much what it says on the tin. It's a campaign to encourage UK skiers to travel to the Alps without flying. And Sally mentioned, the influence of the younger generation, let's say. This particular campaign was definitely inspired by a schoolgirl, although it's probably not the one that you're thinking of, because that young lady there who's circled is my daughter. On one of the climate change demonstrations last year, Friday afternoon, and I'm very happy that she was going on these demonstrations, but I did feel that it couldn't quite go on an unlimited basis. So we sat down as a household and we discussed, how we as a household might be able to reduce our own emissions. And that led me to thinking, well, I work in the ski industry. I think I can probably come up with some influence and some ideas there. And that literally led me to set up Ski Flight Free. Now, the other schoolgirl who you're probably thinking of, who clearly influenced everybody you can see in this picture, is Greta Thunberg. And it's amazing to think that it really was only maybe 18 months ago that she came onto the scene, and she's been extremely influential in that time. And I think the title of her book probably summarizes this extremely well. No one is too small to make a difference. A quick read collection of her speeches, and I recommend that you have a look if you haven't seen it already. But that message that nobody is too small to make a difference has really made a difference with millennials, the younger generation. And one of the reasons suggested here in this quote that I found is that millennials are in this era where climate change is widely discussed. Now, I see that as being slightly different. It's not only being discussed, but the whole of their lives, they're experiencing climate change. Headlines are around the whole time that demonstrate what is going on, particularly within the ski industry. We see that, particularly, but it's generally in the news. These kind of headlines in relation to climate change are ever present within their lives. And I think that this leads to that, younger generation instinctively understanding that something like flying is problematic, let's say. To them, the idea of, and apologies for anyone who's Swedish out there, but I'm not exactly sure the pronunciation, we'll go for flygskam. But that means flight shame. They understand that concept of flight shame instinctively, and they understand that there's a carbon cost in relation to flying. Daniel mentioned how you can reduce your cost of traveling to a resort in terms of carbon emissions by taking the train, and it's extremely significant compared with flying. And that's not a concept that is new to the younger generation. And in addition to that, I think that they are fully aware there's a moral issue at stake here as well. A single flight to the Alps and back is going to generate as much CO2 emissions as someone in a whole year living in any number of countries. So that's an issue as well. I think they're more prepared to demonstrate their beliefs and to stand out. And that is very important to the ski industry, because the ski industry has an aging demographic. This was the 2019 survey from the Ski Club of Great Britain. And I think possibly a bit shyly, they haven't stuck in an over 60 category on this list. But what's evident, what's very clear, is there's very few young people skiing and coming into the industry. And it's an aging demographic. And those people will ultimately stop skiing unless the younger generation can be drawn in. And it's that influence being driven by the millennials that's leading to changes within the industry, more environmentally dynamic products being introduced and covered in the media. whether it's in ski resorts itself, or whether it's tour operators, introducing special discounts, etc. To adapt that product is extremely important, and it's the younger generation who are driving this. So I thought I'd just finish off with this slide here. I think that the ski industry needs to give a flake and pay attention to the desires of that younger generation, or the ski industry will be disappearing. There's actually a campaign by Aspen called Give a Flake, where they are demonstrating how their environmental position. That's it. Thank you, Sally.
Thank you, Ian. That was really interesting. I read that EasyJet are now flying and offsetting all their flights. The first company to do so. Is that a good thing? Is that the way forward?
Well, we could talk for a long time about offsetting. To cover it in some broad strokes, there are a lot of limitations within offsetting itself. A lot of the time people would be, for example, investing in great projects which involve planting trees, but the offset for planting trees is going to come over a much longer period of time. And if you take a flight, you're putting that carbon dioxide into the air straight away. Ultimately, the only way to reduce emissions is to reduce emissions. And individuals, as Daniel pointed out, 57% of the emissions generated by a ski holiday come from traveling to resort. So you can make a difference as an individual. I'm personally not a fan of offsetting.
Okay, thank you. So now we're going to move on to Jim, who is the founder of Butta, B-U-T-T-A, which sells eco ski board and wax. So they're changing the wax game. They're all about saving the planet and having some fun while they're doing it. He originally set it up in his dad's garage, and he's constantly pushing to improve the eco formulas in his wax. So keeping fluorocarbons off the piece, Jim, how can one small thing have such a big impact?
Yeah, I mean, welcome everybody, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk. So it's really great to be here. And I actually want to thank Rachel as well for highlighting the forever chemical and the fact that it is so involved in our industry and how many people are really using it. And it's interesting because back in 2006, the Environmental Protection Agency actually went out to all the manufacturers of the chemical and said, you need to stop using this and you need to start eliminating it. And they wanted it out on a global ban on it. But the problem was it was a voluntary thing for the companies. And it's crazy that still today, even though the dangers of it that we all know about, it's still being used so much. And Rachel highlighted really well the dangers to the environment and things like that, and the fact that a polar bear had it in its blood. And the truth is that it can be as low as 1 part per trillion. So that's the equivalent of like 1 teaspoon in 1,000 Olympic swimming pools. That can damage you, and that can cause the problems, not just to the environment, but to you as the user. And that's why Butta started, because what we were looking at was actually the implications on the body, not just the mountains, but actually the user. Because even just holding a block of fluorocarbon wax, it can get into your bloodstream and into your body. And back when I was a technician, to the early 2000s, when this all started for me, all waxes were high fluoro, HFs, high fluoro, and it was made to sound cool, and it was a way of promoting the wax. And we all just thought, what is fluoro? Back then we didn't know much about it, and it just sounded cool. It was like the higher the fluoro, the better. Fluoro effectively gives you water repellency. So what people thought was the higher the fluoro, the faster you're going to go. And that's what people think waxing is all about. It's about speed. Whereas why we wax our kit is more to protect it, to make it last longer, to make it go from season to season to season, rather than just getting speed. And that's what I think one of the things of this industry is that it's become a bit of a disposable market, and people are renewing their kit every year. And I think it's going to be a lot down to the consumer to take on this the program from the EPA about reducing fluorocarbons themselves, not just for the manufacturers. It's about us making that moral decision, go, no, you know what, I am going to find an eco-clothing brand. I am going to find a lower fluoro way of living this life, and that's so important. And that's the thing, the symptoms of fluorocarbons are actually quite impactful. I mean, there's the lower end from small exposure, which is headaches, muscle fatigue, nausea, all the things that as a skier or a snowboarder you do not want, and that's the thing. But there's long-term effects, there's memory loss, there's organ damage. And one of the main things that stood out for me was that it affects the reproductive system. And I was a young guy, and I was admittedly a drinker and a smoker, and I didn't need any help in that area. And I was a guy that always considered myself someone wanted a family. So once I got given this first ever report on fluorocarbons back in the 2000s when I was a tech, it hit me hard, and I knew I had to try and make a change. And that's when Butter began, and we pride ourselves on finding alternatives and better carbon-free ways of producing wax that isn't reliant on the fluoro and that water repellency. And there's so many ways of doing it. And I think the worry is that by people assume that eco products aren't as good or don't perform as well as non-eco products. And I think that's the mindset that we've got to change. And we're out there doing that. As a company, we go to all around the world to different resorts, and we're signed to quite a few different events. Like we've been to sort of Air and Style, and we've kind of used our wax on some of the top 50 riders in the UK at competition level. And you know, we've tried and tested it, and it's out there, and people love it. And that's the key message here: is that eco doesn't mean it's worse. It's just a better way, and it's going to prolong our ski industry as much as it can. So yeah, and that's kind of who we are and what we're about, and we're going to carry on doing that as long as we can. So yeah, over to you, Sally.
That's great. Just one small thing can make an enormous amount of difference. Thank you for that. I'm now going to hand over to my co-founder of whoski.com. She cares about the environment on a local and national level, and quite honestly, on an international level at the moment. We set up whoski.com a couple of years ago as our kids kept growing out of their ski wear every year, and we wanted to find a more affordable way of going skiing. It all took off when we were eating a burger one night in Wimbledon, and whoski.com was formed. The last cog in the circular economy machine. You have Rachel, who's looking at how products are made, what they're made from, and bringing the appropriate products into the circular economy. And whoski.com was set up to keep things out of landfill and to keep those the ski gear actually within the circular economy. So wash it, list it, sell it, as we say at whoski.com. It's your turn, Nicola. And are ski clothes really an issue on the environment? Over to you.
The answer to that, Sally, is hell yes, they are. Thank you very much for everybody who's joined our seminar today. I'm going to kick off with some pretty horrifying statistics about the fashion industry. We've heard from Rachel already about some of the nasties. I'm talking here on this slide about quantities. The amount of clothing which is disposed of every year is absolutely horrifying. So getting worse year on year as fast fashion has taken hold. Lots of clothes made cheaply, not built to last, dumped after just a few wears. And when I say just a few wears, I mean sometimes as few as one wear. Some people refresh their wardrobe on a daily basis. They call them the Instagram generation. They don't want to be seen in the same outfit twice, but it's not just young people. Sally and I were at the ski show last year, and it was extraordinary the number of people who said, oh yeah, my husband buys a new jacket every single year. Wear it once, throw it away, and what happens to it? Quite terrifyingly, it goes into landfill or it gets incinerated. That's 73% of used clothes, or 11 million items every week, literally dumped or burned. Even clothes that you give to a charity shop, 75% of clothing donated to charity shops does not sell. And it's even worse for specialist items like ski clothing, where obviously the market is smaller, so it just doesn't shift off the shelves. Ski clothing, obviously a particular problem. We've heard about the forever chemical, the PFCs, devastating to wildlife. A lot of manufacturers are now switching to more eco resources to create their clothing, but it still hangs around. What happens to them if they're not sold? They don't biodegrade. These clothes are built to last. We know our ski clothing lasts for years and years and years. It's made of mixed materials. It's got specialist coatings. It's hard to recycle. A lot of clothing is made out of recycled materials, which is fantastic, but it's hard to recycle recycled materials. We're still, the scientists are still working on that one. So the best thing to do is keep it in circulation. As Patagonia puts it, the most environmentally sustainable jacket is the one that's already in your closet, or as Huski would say, in somebody else's closet. Pass it on. So what to do? Basically, keep those clothes in circulation for as long as possible via what we call the circular economy, which is why we're here for Circular Economy Week 2020. You might be sick of the sight of your jacket before it starts to show any signs of degradation, but it's still pretty much as good as new. And somebody else would love to have it. Pass it on. And we're not just talking about kids stuff. This is adult clothes as well. You know, I've got jackets I've had for years and years and years, and I'm sick of the sight of them before they've actually started to wear out. Best thing to do with them, sell them on to somebody else. As I heard on the Eco Textile podcast just the other day, extending the active service life of clothing via resale is likely to be one of the most effective ways to green up the entire textiles industry. That's what we're enabling. So what is being done? Some action by governments and industry. France is especially forward thinking on this. It adopted a due diligence law in 2018, and fashion companies there are now required to audit and disclose the environmental and social impact of their supply chains, as well as log and look at what happens to them after they're no longer used or after they've gone off sale. The UK Parliamentary Environmental Audit Committee looked closely at the fast fashion business back in 2018-2019. And we've got on the right-hand side here, Mary Cray, who was then an MP and chairman of that committee, has pointed out that if you're not sustainable, you won't be around in 10 years' time. That committee put forward various proposals, including things like extended producer responsibility, proposed tax breaks for companies if they do the right thing. Unfortunately, the government has been a little bit busier with other things since, and none of those were actually adopted. But it's an indication that hopefully we can be moving in the right direction, and I'm quite confident that these issues will return when there's a bit more time for them. Why should we be doing things in the circular economy? Well, let's face it, the circular economy is nothing new. The Wombles and the Clangers were at it back in the 1970s, and they still are. Bob the Builder was talking about fixing it back in the 80s and 90s, and that's normalized now. Fixing things rather than just dumping them is increasingly fashionable, increasingly something that people do. There's a great initiative in the Three Valleys called One Tree, where there's a lady with a sewing machine who literally will mend your ski wear, your winter sports wear, as it wears out. Thoroughly approve. So the pass it on message is nothing new, but the way we talk about it has changed big time. Second hand is no longer second rate. Sites like Depop and Vinted, other resale sites like Huski.com have helped drive that pre-loved revolution. So now we cherish vintage, retro, thrifting. Resale and commerce are the new, and re-commerce are the new buzzwords in retail. And the second-hand clothing market is predicted to double in the next 5 years, according to a ThreadUp report from 2 years ago. This is the area to be in, hence Huski.com. One of the new trend of second-hand fashion verticals, we're a peer-to-peer marketplace, enabling people like you to easily buy and sell on their no longer wanted ski and snowboard clothing, and we make a donation to charity on every sale. Keeping hard to recycle, hard-wearing and good as new clothing in circulation and out of landfill, supporting the Ski Green agenda, and a proud member of the circular economy. Just to finish off, a very quick word about how we fit into the overarching movement by the ski industry now to boost its environmental credentials, protect the mountains, and enable that ski green path. I've just listed here a few resorts. There are masses of resorts that are doing some really, really great things to help protect our mountains. When you're booking your holiday, look out for the sort of things that your resort are doing. And at the bottom there, you can see some of the marks to look out for that show that the right things are being done. Thank you very much for your time. I'm going to hand back to Sally now for a bit more of the circular economy.